It is my pleasure to address the Global Solutions Summit, discussing the importance of G20, multilateral cooperation, and the new global order. How to reinvigorate the international multilateral cooperation. I think we should start with the basics, and the basic thing is do no harm. There should be no place for blame game, scapegoating, or if I may use an expression recently made by a group of leaders of members of the United Nations, led by Mr. Steinmeier, the president of Germany, this is not the time for geopolitical turf battles. We see how harmful such turf battles are when we look at the current paralysis of the Security Council of the United Nations. And I think that we have to start from where we are. And where we are is the G20. Now, G20 had an important meeting some time ago, 26 March this year precisely, and it has adopted a document which should be a good platform for multilateral cooperation in the era which we are starting. We have to be aware of the gravity of the situation in which the world has found itself and the urgency of that situations. Now, governments around the world are reserving trillions of dollars and euros for national economies and for preservation of the basis for future development. This is all fine and good and necessary, but we have to think also about global tasks. There are two global tasks which are of great importance today. First, the need to support the global health cooperation and the existing health systems. These days, former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Gordon Brown, has produced an open letter, which was co-signed by about 100 persons from around the world, focusing on the most immediate tasks in the area of global health cooperation. One talks here about a fund, about an immediate fund which would consist of about 8 billion United States dollars. 1 billion needed immediately for World Health Organization, 3 billions for the development of vaccines, 2.5 billion for therapeutics, and there are some other costs which are immediate and which have to be covered. So there is a need to convene an international conference, a pledging conference, possibly a pledging summit that would look into the immediate needs in the field of international health cooperation and chart the way forward. This is a moment where we have to stand together and when we have to figure out the way forward. We have a basis in the important decisions of G20, but more work needs to be done, and the way to start is to start with the emergency funding. Now, of course, one has to think also about the global cooperation in the field of securing basis for future development. There is a need for coordinated fiscal stimuli, which is something that is already considered by the International Monetary Fund, which has a certain amount of resources available for such purpose. But this has to be complemented by coordinated activity of central banks, of the European Bank, and on other financial centers of the world. So these are the tasks which are emerging and which are relatively known. They are also very important because if we are serious about reinvigorating the multilateral cooperation, we have to start precisely with these tasks. Let me repeat, this is not the time for geopolitical turf battles or for neglect of multilateral dimension of international action so needed these days. Now I'm speaking, giving this opening remarks in my capacity as president of Club de Madrid, organization of 110 democratically elected leaders who have worked until recently as presidents or prime ministers of their countries. We have gone through crisis situations before, including the crisis of financial system in 2008 and 2009. And we know how important the multilateral action is. Let us remember the heroic time of G20, which was put together in 2008 and played a critically important role in overcoming the global financial crisis. This crisis now is even more serious. And that is why so many members of Club de Madrid has immediately answered the initiative of Prime Minister Gordon Brown. And this is why we are insisting on the immediate decisions that would be informed by the gravity and urgency of the situation, and which will be expressed in determining and securing the necessary financial resources for action in the future. Obviously, this is the global priority, but there are priorities in specific regions as well. And again, in Club de Madrid, we are thinking very seriously about the situation in Europe. Let me add a few personal remarks in this regard. The European Union is facing one of the most challenging situations in its entire history. The question of solidarity and what constitutes solidarity of the European Union is put before members of the European Union and the people of Europe more generally. We have to think seriously about this question. This is not a technical issue. This is not a temporary issue. This is a fundamental issue. And now, if the European Union wishes to be a global player, it has to improve its solidarity, its cohesion, its coherence of action. And in order to do that, it has to think seriously about what would it take to make European Union coherent, cohesive, and effective in the circumstances that are emerging. We understand that these days the financial ministers of the European Union and heads of state and government will discuss the questions of various financial instruments, including the question of Eurobonds, which will be designed to address the question of debt, which is going to rise as a result of the much needed measures to keep the economies alive and keep the basis for future development relatively strong. So this question of debt mutualization is inevitably going to be on the agenda. And I hope that this problem will be addressed adequately and that a common European solution will be found. I'm not suggesting any particular model, but a seriousness of discussion is clearly necessary in our circumstances. And then, of course, one can look into the picture from a more long-term perspective as well, as far as European Union is concerned. There are already proposals to give the European Union the capacity to borrow as union, and to a very limited extent in the cases of natural disasters or similar unpredictable situations, most particularly health crisis of the nature as the one which we are now experiencing. That obviously would require revision of the European Union Treaty, Article 310, which doesn't allow borrowing for European Union. But we have to think out of the box. We have to understand the new situation. We have to understand that the very existence of the European Union is at stake, and therefore bold initiatives, bold thinking, and renewed commitment to European Union, all this is necessary. Now, dear friends, these are some of the remarks that I wish to make at the opening of our meeting, and I hope that this meeting will contribute to the development of an approach to multilateralism which will reinvigorate the multilateralism in our era in the 21st century. And when trying to do so, we are aware that none of these problems are really altogether new. I would like to remind ourselves that back in 2004, 16 years ago, the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, commissioned a high-level panel report, which became known as the Report on Threats, Challenges, and Change. That report, which was produced by the eminent people of our era, has identified the question of biological security and the question of fighting possible outbreaks of large epidemics and pandemics as one of the emerging threats, something that can happen very easily. We have seen this happening in the recent past. Luckily, there were mechanisms that were able to handle those situations in the past. But right now, we are facing a much more serious and much more overwhelming threat, globally overwhelming threat. So we have to come back to this basic wisdom, which was articulated at least 15 years ago, and where we have seen a much follow-up in different quarters in the world. This is the time to put together all the thinking that exists. This is the time to put together all the good ideas that exist. And this is the time to make sure that we do not become victims of narrow-minded and parochial opinions, that we do not become victims of finger-pointing and geopolitical turf battles. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a very successful and thought-provoking discussion. I hope that thinking out of the box will dominate our discussion, and that as a result, we shall be wiser than before.